Do not throw that letter away. Your mother wrote it before I was born. The words stopped Charles Whitmore beneath the crystal lights of the Whitmore Foundation Gala, but only for a second. 17-year-old Nia Carter stood beyond the velvet rope separating invited guests from the marble entrance hall of Atlanta's Belmont Hotel, holding a yellowed envelope between both hands. Her coat was too thin for the January cold, and the soles of her black sneakers were worn smooth from walking 3 blocks after the bus dropped her off. Around her, polished shoes crossed the shining floor, champagne glasses touched with soft chimes, and conversations worth millions of dollars continued beneath music from a string quartet. Charles turned toward her. At 62, he was tall, silver-haired, and instantly recognizable from business magazines and television interviews. His company had reshaped entire sections of Atlanta, and tonight hundreds of wealthy donors had gathered to hear him speak about community renewal. Nia had spent 40 minutes trying to reach him. Now she had his attention for less than 5 seconds. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, stepping closer to the rope, "my grandmother told me to put this in your hands." Rebecca Sloan appeared before Charles could answer. The foundation director wore a dark blue evening suit and the controlled expression of someone trained to prevent surprises. "Young lady, this is a private event." "I know. I am not trying to get inside. If you need financial assistance, the foundation has an application process." Nia's fingers tightened around the envelope. "I did not ask for money." Rebecca lowered her voice. "Then you need to leave the entrance area." Nia looked past her toward Charles. "Sir, please. My grandmother has kept this for 32 years. Charles glanced at the envelope. His name was written across the front in faded blue ink. Charles Whitmore. Personal. The handwriting was uneven with age, but he did not study it long enough to recognize anything. "Give it to Miss Sloan," he said. "She handles correspondence." "My grandmother said only you should open it." A few nearby guests had begun watching. Charles noticed them. Nia noticed him noticing them. Something cold settled inside her chest. He had not asked her name. He had not asked her grandmother's name. He had already decided what kind of interruption she was. "I have a speech in 4 minutes," Charles said. "Whatever this is, my office can review it." "It is not for your office." Rebecca stepped between them. "That is enough." Nia held the envelope higher. "Your mother trusted my grandmother." Charles's expression changed, but only slightly. His mother had been dead for more than 3 decades. People had used her name before, usually in requests for donations or stories designed to reach him emotionally. "I am sorry," he said, though his voice carried little apology. "I cannot help you tonight." Nia stared at him. "I did not come here for your help." The quartet continued playing. A server passed with a silver tray of glasses. Charles turned toward the ballroom doors, and Rebecca signaled a hotel employee to guide Nia outside. Nia did not argue. She placed the envelope on the edge of a marble table near the entrance. "Then read it when you have time to decide who we are," she said. She walked toward the revolving doors before anyone could answer. Outside, cold air struck her face. She pulled her coat closed and headed toward the bus stop without looking back. Inside, Charles entered the ballroom to applause. Rebecca remained in the lobby for another minute, watching the yellow envelope as if it were an inconvenience someone had forgotten to remove. A hotel employee approached the table while clearing abandoned programs and empty glasses. He picked up the envelope with the other paper items and moved toward a waste container near the service corridor. Charles, returning briefly because he had forgotten his reading glasses, saw the envelope in the employee's hand. "Wait," he said. The employee stopped. Charles reached for it. Under the brighter lobby light, he finally looked closely at the faded handwriting. His breath caught. The curve of the capital C. The long line beneath his last name. The small backward slant he had seen on birthday cards throughout his childhood. For 32 years, Charles had believed he would never see that handwriting again. He took the envelope without speaking. From inside the ballroom, Rebecca called his name. Charles did not answer immediately. His thumb moved across the edge of the paper, but he did not open it. Not yet. Through the glass doors, he saw Nia standing alone beneath a streetlight half a block away, waiting for a bus in the cold. Then the ballroom erupted in applause for the man who was supposed to speak about rebuilding communities, while he stood frozen in the lobby holding a message from the mother he had buried 3 decades earlier. 3 days before the gala, Nia had been sitting at the small kitchen table in the apartment she shared with her grandmother, sorting grocery receipts into 2 piles. bills they could pay this month and bills that would have to wait. The apartment was warm only near the old radiator beneath the window, which clicked and hissed whenever the heat came on. Outside, winter rain moved across the parking lot and gathered beneath the orange streetlights. Evelyn Carter sat across from her with a wool blanket over her knees and a wooden box resting in her lap. "Stop looking at those numbers for a minute," she said. Nia put down the electric bill. "Numbers do not disappear when I stop looking at them. Neither do important things." Evelyn opened the box. Inside were old photographs, folded documents, and a yellowed envelope wrapped in a clean white handkerchief. Nia had seen the box before, but had never been allowed to search through it. Evelyn lifted the envelope carefully. "I need you to take this to Charles Whitmore." Nia stared at her. "The billionaire? He was not always a billionaire." "That does not answer my question." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Yes, that Charles Whitmore." Nia looked at the envelope. "Why me?" "Because I should have delivered it years ago." "Then why did you not?" Evelyn's smile disappeared. She looked toward the rain-darkened window. "Fear can become a habit if you practice it long enough." Nia waited for more, but Evelyn only placed the envelope on the table. "His mother wrote it." "You knew his mother?" "I worked nights cleaning offices in a hotel his family owned." "Margaret." "Whitmore treated me like I had a name when many people in that building treated me like part of the furniture." Evelyn touched the edge of the handkerchief. "She was kind to me when kindness cost her something." Nia turned the envelope over. It was sealed. "What is inside?" "Something her son should have learned a long time ago." "That sounds mysterious on purpose." "Some truths sound that way because people worked hard to bury them." Evelyn's voice became softer. "Promise me you will put it in his hands." Nia looked at her grandmother. "How am I supposed to get close to a billionaire?" "You are smart. Find a way." That was how Nia learned about the foundation gala. A social media post announced the event, and a local news article listed the hotel. Nia knew she would never get inside, but she only needed a few seconds near the entrance. Now, 3 nights later, she sat on a city bus leaving downtown Atlanta with empty hands and a heavy feeling beneath her ribs. She did not know Charles had recovered the envelope. As far as she knew, it was still sitting on the marble table or already inside a trash container. Her phone showed 2 missed calls from Evelyn. Nia called back immediately. "Did you give it to him?" Evelyn asked. Nia looked through the bus window at towers sliding past in reflections of gold and white. "I got close." "That is not what I asked." Nia hesitated. "He saw it." Evelyn was silent. "Nia, I left it where he could take it." "Did he read it?" "I do not know." Evelyn released a tired breath. Nia closed her eyes. "I tried, Grandma." "I know you did." The disappointment in Evelyn's voice was gentle, which made it harder to hear. When Nia reached home, a white notice was taped beside the apartment building entrance. She stopped beneath the weak porch light and read it twice. Whitmore Development Group was hosting a resident information meeting concerning the East Auburn Renewal Project. The notice described planned property acquisitions, structural redevelopment, and relocation assistance. Nia felt the cold return to her hands. Their building address appeared in small print near the bottom. Upstairs, Evelyn was asleep on the couch with the television playing quietly. Nia folded the notice and placed it beside the unpaid bills. Then she sat at the kitchen table and searched the project on her phone. The images showed glass storefronts, new apartments, landscaped sidewalks, and smiling families carrying shopping bags. The words promised renewal, opportunity, and a stronger community. Nia looked around their kitchen at the chipped cabinet door, the old refrigerator covered with school photographs, and the pencil marks on the wall where Evelyn had measured her height every birthday since she was 7. Renewal looked different when someone else was deciding what needed to disappear. Across the city, Charles finished his gala speech to a standing ovation. He spoke about investment, dignity, and giving neighborhoods a future. The unopened envelope remained inside his coat pocket the entire time. After midnight, he returned to his house in Buckhead and placed it on the desk in his private study. He poured a glass of water, sat down, and stared at his name in his mother's handwriting. Twice, he reached toward the envelope. Twice, he stopped. Finally, he placed it inside the top drawer and turned the key. He told himself he was tired. He told himself the girl could have found an old sample of his mother's handwriting. He told himself there were people who built elaborate stories to reach wealthy men. But when he turned off the lamp, one sentence followed him into the dark. Your mother trusted my grandmother. And several miles away, Nia lay awake listening to the radiator click, wondering whether the same man who had refused to hear her was about to take away the only home she had ever known. By 8 the next morning, Charles Whitmore was standing 42 floors above downtown Atlanta, looking through a wall of glass while the city moved beneath him. From that height, neighborhoods became patterns of rooftops and roads, and problems became colored sections on development maps. His office occupied the corner of Whitmore Development Group headquarters, a space of pale wood, quiet carpet, and windows so clean they seemed invisible. On the conference table behind him, executives reviewed the East Auburn renewal project. Charles listened as they discussed acquisition percentages, construction schedules, investor expectations, and relocation packages. Rebecca Sloan sat near the end of the table, representing the foundation's community outreach division. Resident resistance remains manageable, said one executive. Most property owners have accepted preliminary offers, and the remaining buildings should move into the next phase within 60 days. Charles turned from the window. There are a few holdouts. A map appeared on the wall screen. Blocks changed color as the executive spoke. Charles recognized none of the streets personally. He had driven through East Auburn twice in the past year, both times inside a car, while someone explained what the neighborhood could become. What about renters? He asked. Relocation assistance is available for qualifying residents. And those who do not qualify? The executive adjusted his papers. They received the notice required by law. Charles nodded slowly. Legal. The word had always comforted him. It created clean borders around difficult decisions. If a process was legal, documented, and approved, he could believe it was fair. The project will bring jobs, safer buildings, and new investment, Rebecca said. The foundation can expand support programs during the transition. Charles looked at the bright architectural image on the screen. Trees lined wide sidewalks. Families sat outside new cafes. Nobody in the image looked worried about rent. Proceed, he said. The meeting ended 20 minutes later. Charles returned to his private office, where his assistant had placed a stack of correspondence on the desk. He ignored it. His thoughts went instead to the locked drawer in his study at home, to the envelope, to the girl standing beneath the hotel lights. He told himself again that there were procedures for people seeking help. Foundations existed for that reason. Applications, reviews, committees. A system protected generosity from manipulation. Yet he remembered the way Nia had looked at him when Rebecca mentioned financial assistance. Not embarrassed. Insulted. At the same hour, Nia was stocking canned soup on Aisle 7 of Carter's Market, a neighborhood grocery store where she worked 4 afternoons and both weekend mornings. The store did not belong to her family despite the name. Mr. Carter, the owner, joked that half of Atlanta shared the last name and none of them received a discount. Nia liked him because he spoke to every employee the same way, whether they were 16 or 60. During her lunch break, she sat behind the store with a paper bag containing an apple and a peanut butter sandwich. Her phone showed another article about the East Auburn project. Charles Whitmore stood in the photograph wearing a hard hat and smiling beside a sign that read "Building Tomorrow Together." Nia stared at the image until the words lost meaning. That evening, she attended the resident information meeting in the basement of a neighborhood church. Evelyn came with her, walking slowly with a cane. Representatives from Whitmore Development stood beside poster boards displaying new apartments and green spaces. A young representative explained relocation assistance using a calm voice and polished slides. Nia raised her hand. Will current renters be able to return after construction? There will be affordable housing options. That was not my question. Several residents turned toward her. The representative smiled carefully. Eligibility will depend on income requirements and unit availability. So you do not know. The project is still developing. Nia looked at Evelyn. Her grandmother's hands rested tightly around the handle of her cane. On the way home, Evelyn said nothing until they reached their building. He has not read it, she said. Nia knew she meant Charles. Maybe he has. If he had, someone would have called. Nia opened the front door. Then I will go to his office. Evelyn stopped. You already tried. I tried at his party. Next time, he will have to look at me without music playing behind him. The following afternoon, Nia stood inside the lobby of Whitmore Development headquarters. The ceiling rose 3 stories above polished stone. Security desks faced the entrance. People moved through glass gates using electronic badges. Nia approached reception and gave her name. I need 5 minutes with Mr. Whitmore. The receptionist asked whether she had an appointment. Nia said no. She explained about the letter. The receptionist made a call. 10 minutes later, Rebecca Sloan stepped from an elevator. Her expression tightened when she recognized Nia. You again. Nia held her ground. Did he read it? Mr. Whitmore receives thousands of messages. That one was written by his mother. Rebecca lowered her voice. You need to understand that approaching him repeatedly can be interpreted as harassment. Nia felt every eye in the lobby become heavier. I came twice. You need to leave. Nia looked beyond Rebecca toward a large development map displayed on the lobby wall. East Auburn was marked in gold. Her building sat inside the redevelopment zone. Your company is trying to move my grandmother out of her home, Nia said. Rebecca followed her gaze. Something in her face changed. Not surprise. Recognition. So that is what this is about, she said. Nia turned back toward her. What do you mean? Rebecca's voice became colder. The letter. The gala. Your grandmother. This is about stopping the project. Nia stared at her. In that moment, she understood that the truth inside the envelope had become even harder for Charles to hear, because now they had given themselves a reason not to listen. High above the lobby, an elevator began descending from the executive floor. Charles stood inside it, unaware that when the doors opened, the girl he had dismissed at the gala would be waiting for him again. The elevator doors opened before Rebecca could say another word, and Charles Whitmore stepped into the lobby with 2 executives beside him. Nia saw him immediately. He saw her a second later. For a moment, neither moved. The lobby continued around them with the soft sound of shoes against stone and the quiet chime of elevators arriving on different floors. Rebecca approached Charles first. I was handling this. Nia heard the sentence and understood exactly what it meant. She was the problem being handled. Charles glanced from Rebecca to Nia. You came back. You did not read the letter. His expression tightened. How would you know that? Because if you had, you would know my grandmother's name. One of the executives looked toward Charles, then quickly away. Charles dismissed both men with a quiet word and waited until they crossed the security gates. Evelyn Carter, Nia said. Charles showed no recognition. That answer was enough. You still have not opened it. The letter is secure. That is not the same thing. Rebecca stepped closer. Nia, Mr. Whitmore has another meeting. Charles looked at his watch, then at the people watching from the reception area. 5 minutes, he said. Rebecca seemed surprised. Nia was more surprised than anyone. Charles led them into a small conference room beside the lobby. Glass walls faced the reception area, but the doors softened the noise outside. Charles remained standing. All right, tell me what you want. Nia looked at him. I want you to read the letter. And after that, you can decide what you want to do with the truth. Charles folded his arms. Your building is part of the East Auburn project. It was not a question. Nia looked toward Rebecca, understanding how quickly the story had been told upstairs. Yes. And your grandmother is concerned about relocation. Everyone in our building is concerned. Charles nodded as though a missing piece had fallen into place. I understand. Nia felt something inside her sink. No, you do not. I understand that redevelopment is difficult for residents. There are assistance programs and formal channels for concerns. This is not why she kept that letter for 32 years. But it is why you are here now. The words were quiet. That made them worse. Nia stared at him. You think my grandmother planned this? I think people under pressure sometimes connect unrelated things. Nia felt heat rise into her face, but she refused to let her voice shake. My grandmother cleaned floors in buildings your family owned while your mother was alive. She kept that envelope through 3 apartments, 2 jobs, and every hard year after that. She did not know your company would come for our block 32 years later. Charles looked toward Rebecca. Do we have any employment record for Evelyn Carter? Rebecca answered carefully. Not that I have seen. Nia almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. So if your files forgot her, she never existed? Charles's jaw tightened. That is not what I said. You did not have to. Silence filled the room. Nia looked through the glass wall at the enormous gold map of East Auburn in the lobby. From inside the conference room, her entire neighborhood fit inside a rectangle no larger than a dining table. Do you know what is across from my building? She asked. Charles seemed confused by the question. No, a laundromat. Beside that is a barber shop that has been there 26 years. 2 doors down is a woman who watches 6 children after school because their parents work late. None of that is on your picture out there. Charles followed her gaze toward the development map. The project will bring new services and investment. For who? For the community. Which community? Rebecca shifted uncomfortably. Charles's expression cooled. I agreed to hear you. I will not debate an entire development project with a 17-year-old in the lobby. Nia became very still. There it was. Not a shouted insult. Not an ugly word. Something quieter. Her age, her coat, her neighborhood, and the color of her skin had all entered the room before her truth had been allowed to speak. You asked what I wanted, she said. I told you. Read the letter. Charles reached for the conference room door. I will review it when I have time. Nia did not move. You have enough money to buy every building on our block, but you still cannot buy the truth inside that envelope. Charles stopped with his hand near the door. Rebecca whispered, That is enough. Nia looked directly at Charles. My grandmother told me your mother was kind when kindness cost her something. I came here because I promised her I would try again. I have done that. What happens next belongs to you. She opened the door herself and walked across the lobby. No one stopped her this time. Outside, afternoon sunlight reflected from the glass tower so brightly that Nia had to lower her eyes. She walked toward the bus stop with her backpack against one shoulder, angry at herself for hoping the second attempt would be different. 42 floors above her, Charles returned to his office, but the meeting waiting for him lasted only 12 minutes before he ended it early. At 7:30 that evening, he entered his house in Buckhead, walked directly to the private study, and unlocked the top drawer of his desk. The envelope was exactly where he had left it. He sat beneath the warm circle of the desk lamp and placed it in front of him. For the first time, he said the name aloud. Evelyn Carter. Then he slid one finger beneath the fragile edge of the envelope and began to open the past. The paper inside the envelope made a dry whisper as Charles unfolded it beneath the desk lamp. There were 4 pages, each covered in the handwriting he remembered from childhood birthday cards, school lunch notes, and the small labels his mother used to place on Christmas gifts. For several seconds, he could not read a single word. He only stared at the shape of the letters. Then he began. Margaret Whitmore had written the letter 32 years earlier, 6 weeks before her death. The opening lines were simple. Charles, if this reaches you, it means I was not brave enough to tell you everything myself. His fingers tightened around the page. He read on. Margaret described the Whitmore Grand Hotel, the property where Evelyn Carter had worked nights as part of the cleaning staff. One evening, Evelyn had found copies of property transfer documents left inside a conference room after a private executive meeting. She had not understood every legal phrase, but she recognized addresses from neighborhoods where people she knew lived. She also recognized signatures that did not look right. Instead of throwing the papers away, Evelyn brought them to Margaret. The documents suggested that a senior executive working for the Whitmore family business had used misleading purchase agreements and falsified records to acquire properties from black homeowners at prices far below their value. Margaret had begun asking questions. The letter did not contain every answer. It contained something worse for Charles: names, dates, property addresses, and the name of a lawyer Margaret trusted. Daniel Price. Charles stopped reading. Daniel had been his family's attorney for decades. He was 74 now and mostly retired, but Charles had spoken with him only 2 months earlier. Charles picked up his phone, then set it down again. He forced himself to finish the letter. Margaret wrote that Evelyn had been dismissed from the hotel shortly after bringing her the documents. The official reason was repeated lateness. Margaret believed it was retaliation. She had tried to help Evelyn privately, but Evelyn refused money. What she wanted was a record of what had happened and protection for the families whose property was being taken. Margaret ended the 3rd page with a sentence Charles read 3 times. If you inherit the company one day, do not confuse legality with justice, and do not assume the people outside your office have less truth than the people sitting inside it. Charles lowered the paper. The study was completely silent. On the wall across from him hung a framed photograph of Margaret standing beside him when he was 12. He remembered her hand on his shoulder. He remembered her funeral. He remembered his father telling him that business required strength and that sentiment could destroy a company. Charles looked back at the final page. Margaret had written that she placed supporting records with Daniel Price and intended to make the matter public after confirming the evidence. She never had the chance. The letter had been entrusted to Evelyn with instructions to deliver it to Charles when he was old enough to understand. Charles sat motionless for nearly 10 minutes. Then he called Daniel. The older man answered on the fourth ring. "Charles, I have a letter from my mother." Silence followed. Charles stood. "It mentions Evelyn Carter." The silence changed. It was no longer confusion. It was recognition. "Where did you get it?" Daniel asked. "Her granddaughter brought it to me." "Charles, we should speak in person." "Did you know?" Daniel released a slow breath. "I knew some of it." "That is not an answer." "Then come to my office tomorrow morning." Charles looked down at the letter. "Bring everything you have." He ended the call before Daniel could respond. Across Atlanta, Nia was finishing her shift at Carter's Market. She stacked the final basket near the entrance and checked the time. 9:18. Mr. Carter offered her a ride home, but she declined because his house was in the opposite direction. The bus arrived late. When Nia reached the apartment, Evelyn was awake at the kitchen table. "You went to his office," she said. Nia removed her coat. "How did you know?" "Because you have your mother's face when you are angry." Nia sat down. "He thinks the letter is about stopping the redevelopment project." Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. "Of course he does. Why did you wait 32 years? Nia asked. Evelyn looked toward the old wooden box on the counter. "Because after Margaret died, people told me the records were gone. They told me I had misunderstood what I saw. I had lost my job. I had a daughter to raise. Every door I knocked on closed politely. But you kept the letter." "Yes." "Why?" Evelyn looked at her granddaughter. "Because being ignored does not make the truth untrue." Nia reached across the table and held her hand. Neither spoke for a while. The radiator clicked. A car passed outside. Then Evelyn asked the question she had been afraid to ask. "Did he open it?" Nia shook her head. "Not while I was there." At that exact moment, Charles was still sitting beneath the desk lamp, reading the first page again. Near midnight, he opened his laptop and searched the property addresses listed in his mother's letter. Most had changed owners multiple times. Some buildings no longer existed. But one address caught his attention. It was less than half a mile from Nia's apartment building. Charles opened the current East Auburn acquisition map and compared the old records with the new project boundaries. The same streets appeared in both. Different decade, different paperwork, different language. Charles leaned closer to the screen. The past had not disappeared. It had been waiting beneath a newer name. At 9 the next morning, Charles entered Daniel Price's office carrying his mother's letter inside a leather folder. Daniel had practiced law in Atlanta for nearly 50 years, and his office looked untouched by modern design. Dark wooden shelves covered the walls. Old legal books leaned against one another. Sunlight passed through narrow blinds and formed pale lines across the carpet. Daniel stood when Charles entered, but Charles did not offer his hand. "Show me what you kept." Daniel looked at the folder. "You read all of it?" "Twice." "Then sit down." "I would rather stand." Daniel studied him for a moment, then crossed the room and unlocked a metal filing cabinet. From the lowest drawer, he removed a gray document box covered with dust. Charles stared at it. "You had this for 32 years. I had what remained." Daniel placed the box on the desk. Inside were copies of property records, handwritten notes from Margaret, correspondence with former employees, and a list of families who had challenged sales agreements during the late 1980s. Charles turned the pages slowly. Many names were black families. Some had owned their homes for decades before selling under pressure or after receiving misleading information about liens and redevelopment plans. "Why did you never tell me?" Charles asked. Daniel sat down heavily. "Your mother died before we completed the investigation. Your father shut down every internal inquiry. He said the documents were incomplete and the accusations would destroy the company. And you agreed?" "I was younger than you are now, Charles. I told myself I was protecting employees, investors, and thousands of people whose jobs depended on the company." Charles looked at him. "That sounds familiar." Daniel lowered his eyes. "It should." Charles opened the East Auburn project map on his tablet and placed it beside the old documents. "Some of these streets are inside our current redevelopment zone." Daniel adjusted his glasses. "That does not prove the same conduct is happening now." "No, but it proves I need to find out." By noon, Charles had ordered an independent review of every East Auburn acquisition, relocation notice, appraisal, and resident complaint from the previous 4 years. He did not tell the board about the letter. He did not tell Rebecca the full reason. He simply froze new acquisitions for 14 days and demanded the original files. The reaction was immediate. Executives warned about delays. Investors requested explanations. Rebecca entered his office carrying a folder and frustration she was trying to hide. Stopping acquisitions without notice creates panic. Then let people panic. Charles, the project is legally compliant. He looked at her. I am beginning to dislike that sentence. Rebecca became quiet. Is this because of the girl? Her name is Nia Carter. Is this because of Nia Carter? No. It is because I finally asked to see what was happening beneath the presentations. Charles opened the folder Rebecca had brought. Inside were summaries of resident complaints. He noticed something immediately. Many were marked resolved, but the attached notes showed only that letters had been sent. Were these residents contacted directly? Rebecca hesitated. Community outreach handled those files. You lead community outreach. We have staff for individual cases. Charles looked up. Did you read them? Rebecca did not answer. That afternoon, the independent review team began comparing property appraisals with market data. By evening, a pattern appeared. Several owners had received offers based on outdated valuations. Renters had received notices written in language that suggested relocation was required sooner than legally necessary. Some residents had been told verbally that holding out would leave them with fewer options, though the written policies said otherwise. None of it looked like the old documents in Margaret's box. There were no copied signatures or obvious falsifications. The modern version was cleaner, softer, wrapped in legal language and polite deadlines. But the result was familiar. People with the least power were being pressured to move before they fully understood their choices. Charles sat alone in the conference room reading the preliminary findings. On the wall, the East Auburn map glowed in gold. For years, he had looked at that color and seen investment. Now he saw doors, kitchens, family photographs, and pencil marks measuring children against apartment walls. He remembered Nia, asking, which community? His phone rang. It was Rebecca. The review team found something else, she said. Your foundation received 14 written complaints about misleading relocation communication last year. Charles closed his eyes. What happened to them? They were referred back to the development division. The division the complaints were about? Rebecca's silence answered him. Charles stood and walked toward the window. 42 floors below, Atlanta moved through the evening. Find every complaint, he said. I want the original letters, not summaries. Charles, if this becomes public before we understand the full scope, the company could face serious consequences. The residents already faced consequences. Rebecca had no response. Charles ended the call. Across the city, Nia sat beside Evelyn at the kitchen table, helping her complete a housing assistance form they both hated needing. A knock sounded at the apartment door. Nia looked through the peephole and saw no camera crew, no security team, and no assistant. Charles Whitmore stood alone in the hallway holding the yellow envelope in one hand and his mother's letter in the other. Nia opened the door but did not invite him inside. Charles looked at her, then at Evelyn standing slowly behind her. For the first time since the gala, he did not begin by asking what they wanted. He lowered his head and said, Mrs. Carter, my mother believed you. I should have believed your granddaughter before I needed proof. Evelyn gripped the back of a chair. Nia said nothing. Charles looked down at the pages in his hand. And I am afraid the truth in this letter did not stay in the past. For several seconds, nobody moved. The hallway light hummed above Charles, and somewhere on the floor below, a television played behind a closed apartment door. Evelyn looked at the letter in his hand as though 32 years had suddenly entered the room with him. Come inside, she said. Nia stepped aside, but her expression remained guarded. Charles entered the apartment and immediately noticed how much of Nia's life had been missing from the development maps. Family photographs covered the refrigerator. A sewing basket rested beside the couch. School certificates bearing Nia's name were framed above a narrow bookshelf. Near the kitchen doorway, pencil marks climbed the wall with dates written beside them. Charles remembered the architectural rendering of East Auburn, clean and bright and empty of memory. Evelyn sat at the table. Margaret wanted the truth made public, she said. Charles placed the letter carefully before her. Daniel Price kept records. We found them. Evelyn looked up sharply. Daniel is still alive? Yes. Then he had 32 years to find me. Charles had no defense for that. You are right. Evelyn touched the edge of the paper but did not unfold it. Your mother was afraid, but she kept moving anyway. That is what courage looked like in her. Your father was different. Charles sat across from her. I know more about that now than I did yesterday. Nia remained standing near the counter. What did you mean when you said the truth did not stay in the past? Charles turned toward her. I ordered a review of the East Auburn project. We found outdated appraisals, misleading relocation communication, and complaints that were sent back to the same division residents were complaining about. So people were right, Nia said. Yes. The word came without qualification. And your company knew? Parts of my company knew pieces. I do not yet know who understood the full pattern. Nia crossed her arms. But you signed off on the project. Charles met her eyes. Yes. Again, no excuse. Evelyn studied him. What are you going to do? Charles opened the leather folder he had brought and removed several pages. All new acquisitions are frozen. An outside legal team is reviewing every offer and notice. We will pay for independent appraisals for affected property owners, and residents will receive legal assistance from attorneys who do not work for my company. Nia looked at the pages but did not reach for them. And renters? That is still being reviewed. Then you are not finished. Charles nodded. No, I am not. The answer seemed to surprise her. He reached into the folder again and removed a smaller envelope. I also want to help you and your grandmother. Personally, housing costs, school expenses, anything you need while this is resolved. Nia looked at the envelope, then at him. Is that a check? Yes. Put it away. Charles paused. Nia, I am not trying to buy your silence. Maybe not. But if you give us money and leave everyone else with forms and waiting lists, what exactly changed? This is separate. It is separate because you know our names now. The room became quiet. Charles looked down at the envelope in his hand. Nia's voice softened, but not her meaning. Mrs. Jackson upstairs has lived here for 18 years. Mr. Green in apartment 12 works nights and takes 2 buses home. The Rivera family has 3 children in the elementary school down the street. They do not have letters from your mother. Do they need one before you see them? Charles slowly returned the check to the folder. Evelyn watched her granddaughter with tired pride. What do you want me to do? Charles asked. Nia shook her head. You keep asking that like I am supposed to design justice for your company. The words landed harder than anger. You have lawyers. You have experts. You have people who understand housing policy. Make them listen to the people who live here before they make another plan for us. Charles nodded. I can do that. And tell the truth publicly. He looked at her. The investigation is not complete. Then say that. Say you found enough to stop and look. Say people complained and your system did not listen. Charles glanced toward Evelyn. That could damage the company. Evelyn finally spoke. Truth usually costs more when you wait. Charles looked at his mother's handwriting on the table. The same lesson had reached him twice, separated by 3 decades. The next morning, Whitmore Development Group issued a public statement announcing an independent investigation into the East Auburn project, a temporary suspension of acquisitions, and a series of resident meetings supervised by outside housing advocates. Charles signed the statement himself. Investors called. Board members demanded emergency meetings. News stations waited outside headquarters. Rebecca entered Charles's office shortly before noon, carrying 14 original complaint letters that the foundation had received the previous year. She placed them on his desk. I should have read these, she said. Charles looked at her. Yes. Rebecca did not defend herself. What happens now? Charles opened the first letter. Now we read every word. Across town, Nia stood behind the register at Carter's Market when the announcement appeared on the small television mounted above the customer service desk. Charles was speaking to reporters. He did not mention Nia. He did not mention Evelyn. He did not call himself brave. He said the company had failed to listen carefully enough, and that responsibility began with him. Mr. Carter turned up the volume. Nia watched for less than a minute before returning to the customer in front of her. Paper or plastic? She asked. But when she looked down to open the bag, her hands were trembling slightly. Not because she believed everything was fixed. It was not. Not because she trusted Charles completely. She did not. Her hands trembled because somewhere between a hotel lobby and a kitchen table, a man who once saw her as an interruption had finally begun to understand that listening was not charity, and the truth her grandmother carried for 32 years was finally moving through doors that had once been closed. The investigation lasted 11 weeks, and during that time, East Auburn became a place people suddenly wanted to discuss on television, in boardrooms, and at public meetings, though the people who lived there had been speaking for years. Charles attended every resident meeting without sitting on a stage. At the first one, he entered the church basement where Nia had once listened to a company representative avoid her questions. This time, folding chairs faced one another in a wide circle. Independent housing attorneys sat along one wall, and translators were available for residents who needed them. Charles took an empty chair near the back. For nearly 3 hours, he listened. Mrs. Jackson described receiving an appraisal that valued her property far below comparable homes only a few blocks away. Mr. Green explained how repeated notices had made him believe he had less time to move than he actually did. The Rivera family spoke about being offered relocation options miles from their children's school. Charles wrote notes until his hand hurt. When residents became angry, he did not leave. When they asked questions he could not answer, he said, "I do not know yet, but I will find out." Nia sat beside Evelyn near the front. She watched Charles carefully. An apology was easy in a quiet apartment. Accountability looked different under fluorescent lights in a room full of people who had reasons not to trust him. 2 weeks later, the independent review confirmed that several acquisition practices had violated company policy, while others had exploited gaps between what was legally permitted and what residents reasonably understood. No single document revealed the entire pattern. That had been part of the problem. Each department had seen only its own piece, and each person had found a reason to believe responsibility belonged somewhere else. Charles called an emergency board meeting. Several directors urged him to release a narrow statement blaming a small group of managers. Charles refused. "I approve the project," he said. "If leadership takes credit when numbers rise, leadership cannot disappear when people are harmed." The company announced a full restructuring of the project. Every affected property owner received a new independent appraisal at company expense. Renters were guaranteed relocation assistance without losing eligibility because of confusing deadlines. Families displaced by construction received a right to return to designated affordable units at protected rates. A resident advisory council was given formal review authority over major changes. The company also funded independent legal representation for residents, with the attorneys selected by a community nonprofit rather than Whitmore Development. None of these changes restored the months of fear people had already experienced, but they changed what would happen next. Rebecca Sloan requested a meeting with Nia and Evelyn. They met at the same church basement on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Rebecca arrived without an assistant. "I owe both of you an apology," she said. Nia waited. Rebecca looked at Evelyn first. "Your complaint should never have been treated as a problem to manage." Then she turned to Nia. "And I decided what you wanted before I listened to you. I told myself I was protecting the foundation. I was protecting my own assumptions." Nia studied her. "What are you going to do differently?" Rebecca seemed surprised by the question. "The foundation is creating an independent complaint review process. That is a policy. I asked what you were going to do." Rebecca lowered her eyes for a moment. "Read before I judge. Ask before I assume. And stop treating access to powerful people as more important than the truth people are trying to bring them." Nia nodded once. "That is a start." Evelyn reached across the table and touched Rebecca's hand briefly. It was not permission to forget. It was an acknowledgement that change had to begin somewhere. Near the end of the 11 weeks, Charles held a press conference outside the Whitmore headquarters. Daniel Price stood nearby with copies of Margaret's archived records. Charles publicly acknowledged that the company's predecessor had failed black property owners decades earlier and announced a historical review of those transactions. He also acknowledged that the modern company had repeated the same moral failure in a different form by allowing procedure to become more important than people. He did not mention Nia until a reporter asked who had caused him to investigate. Charles paused. "A 17-year-old girl brought me a letter," he said. "I nearly ignored her because I thought I understood her reason for coming before I knew anything about her. That failure was mine." Nia watched the broadcast from Evelyn's apartment. The white relocation notice had been removed from beside the entrance weeks earlier. Their building would remain, renovated rather than demolished, and residents would be protected under a long-term affordability agreement. Evelyn sat beside Nia on the couch with Margaret's letter resting on the coffee table. He finally read it. Evelyn said, Nia smiled faintly. It took him long enough. Evelyn laughed, then became quiet. Your mother would have been proud of you. Nia looked down at her hands. I just delivered an envelope. No, Evelyn said. You walked through doors that wanted you to turn around. Outside, rain touched the windows in soft, steady lines. Across the city, Charles stood alone in his office after the reporters had gone. The gold East Auburn map had been removed from the lobby. In its place, the company was preparing a new plan shaped by the people who actually lived there. Charles opened the copy of his mother's letter and read the final sentence again. Then he looked out across Atlanta, no longer seeing only property lines and project zones, but thousands of windows glowing in the evening, each one holding a life that no map could fully explain. 6 months later, the first warm days of spring reached East Auburn, and the neighborhood looked different without feeling erased. Fresh paint covered the front of Nia's apartment building, but the pencil marks inside Evelyn's kitchen doorway remained untouched. The laundromat across the street had new windows. The barber shop still opened at 7 every morning, and the same red chair remained beside its front window. Construction crews worked 2 blocks away on a community center designed through months of resident meetings, arguments, revisions, and votes. Nia was finishing her senior year of high school while still working weekends at Carter's Market. She had been accepted into a public university in Georgia with financial aid and planned to study public policy. When people asked whether Charles Whitmore had paid for her education, she always answered the same way. No, I applied like everyone else. Charles had offered no private scholarship after the night in Evelyn's apartment. He had understood her refusal. Instead, the foundation created a scholarship program reviewed by an independent committee for students from neighborhoods affected by redevelopment projects, and Nia refused to apply during its first year because she wanted no question about why she had been selected. On a Saturday morning, Evelyn and Nia attended the opening of the East Auburn Community Center. There was no red carpet. Folding chairs stood beneath white tents. Children drew with sidewalk chalk near the entrance, and local business owners served coffee and breakfast biscuits. Charles arrived without a private entrance. He shook hands, listened to complaints about parking, and laughed when Mr. Green told him the new benches were placed in the wrong spot for afternoon shade. Nia watched from a distance while helping Evelyn toward a chair. Charles noticed them but did not immediately approach. He had learned that not every moment required him at the center of it. The ceremony was brief. A local teacher spoke. Mrs. Jackson spoke. A representative from the Resident Advisory Council explained that the building would offer after-school programs, legal assistance clinics, job training, and meeting rooms controlled by the community rather than the company. Charles spoke last. He thanked the residents who had challenged him and said that a building meant nothing if the people around it had no power to shape what happened inside. Then he stepped away from the microphone. No one called Nia to the stage. She had asked them not to. After the crowd began moving toward the building, Charles found Evelyn sitting beneath a tree. Nia stood beside her holding 2 cups of lemonade. Mrs. Carter, Charles said. Evelyn smiled. You can call me Evelyn now. 32 years seems long enough for formalities. Charles laughed softly. He carried a flat archival box beneath one arm. I wanted to show you something. He opened it on the table. Inside was Margaret's original letter, protected beneath clear archival material, along with copies of the old property records and Evelyn's written testimony. The historical archive is ready, Charles said. Your name is part of the record now, exactly where it should have been. Evelyn looked at the display for a long time. Margaret would have liked that. I hope so. Charles turned toward Nia and held out the original yellow envelope. This belongs to you. Nia took it carefully. The paper was softer now, its corners rounded by decades of hands. Why me? She asked. Because the letter was my mother's truth, but delivering it was your courage. Nia looked at him. Do not make me sound heroic. I was angry most of the time. I have learned those things can exist together. Evelyn laughed. Nia smiled despite herself and slipped the envelope into her bag. Later that afternoon, after the ceremony ended and the tents began coming down, Nia walked Evelyn home before returning to help clean the community center. On the way back, she saw an older woman standing at the curb with 2 heavy grocery bags. Nia crossed the street, took one bag, and walked beside her toward the bus stop. Across the intersection, Charles stood near the entrance of the news center. He watched Nia help the woman without looking around to see who noticed. For years, Charles had believed power was measured by how much a person could build, buy, control, or change with a signature. Nia had shown him another kind. The kind that stopped for someone when there was no audience. The kind that carried a truth after stronger people had buried it. The kind that refused a private reward when an entire neighborhood deserved justice. Charles reached into his coat pocket and touched the folded copy of his mother's final page. A spring wind moved between the buildings, carrying the sound of children laughing from the community center courtyard. Nia reached the bus stop and placed the grocery bag beside the older woman. She said something that made the woman smile, then turned and walked back toward the center. The afternoon light stretched across the sidewalk. Charles did not call her name. He did not need to thank her again. Nia did not see him standing there, and somehow that made the moment more honest. She kept walking beneath the young leaves moving in the wind, while behind her a man who once believed a poor black girl had come asking for something finally understood that she had arrived carrying the one thing his money could never purchase, the truth.